Hello, everybody. Good evening. Happy New Comic Book Day, and welcome back to another Indie Comics Talk. And hello, Phil. Welcome in. Tonight, we've got the writer of the new original graphic novel from AWA, Gatsby. The music scared you, Phil. Jeremy Holt is joining us tonight, and Jeremy also is the writer of Made in Korea from Image Comics, also currently writing an Iron Fist story with Marvel Unlimited. So many cool things going on right now for Jeremy and their writing career. Welcome in. How are you doing tonight?
Good. How are you?
Very good. One, loved Gatsby, big fan of Made in Korea. And as I was preparing for the interview, there were so many more books that I did not even realize that you had written before. And I'm like,
yeah, a lot of small press publishing or publication.
Yeah. I started reading Virtually Yours and have been really enjoying that one as well. But so many more books added to my TBR pile after that little deep dive into what you've done.
Very cool. Thanks for having me.
And good timing, Phil. Currently reading Made in Korea.
Nice.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. Really excited to talk about Gatsby and your other stuff you got going on. I know not just Marvel, but DC work coming up too.
Yes.
Which is
it's been a
awesome.
busy year.
Yeah. I love seeing when indie creators get to take that step into writing projects for the big two that are really near and dear to them and kind of what they want to do at that level.
Yeah, it's certainly not something if I'm being completely honest, I never really thought I'd get that opportunity. I was just really focused on getting published by Image. I spent, I don't know, well over a decade trying to get in with them. And I've so many pitches that have never seen the light of day. And yeah, I just seeing all my friends come before me, you do a book at Image, and if it does marginally well and makes, a splash, hopefully you get, some of that attention from an editor at Marvel DC.
And Made in Korea seemed like it did well without knowing the actual numbers behind it, but just from hearing response to it.
Yeah, it definitely did better than I was expecting. And it just, I'm glad that of all the things I've pitched to them, they went with easily the most personal thing I'd written at the time. So yeah, it just felt like kismet in a lot of ways.
Awesome. So for those that don't know, typically on this channel, we do a little bit of like what's your comic book origin story? And, how did you get into reading comics? And then what made you take that step and say, I want to write comics?
It was sort of out of a desperation, to be honest. I went to art school. I went to film school. I thought I was going to be making movies. And then you go through that process and you realize, actually, this is not what I want to do. It's a lot harder to become a director than people might think. And I got disillusioned by it pretty quickly. But I didn't want to change my major, 2/3 of the way through college. So I just stuck it out and worked at a sound studio in New York City for a bit as a sound editor, really just a glorified internship. And I didn't like that ultimately. So I gave up on being creative. And so I fell into tech and I ended up working for Apple for a long time as a genius. And it was around 2007, 2008 that I was hanging out with my oldest brother who happened to collect comics as a kid. So I was around comics, like I was aware of obviously the X-Men. And I remember reading issues of probably Jim Lee's run on the X-Men. And I distinctly remember the stories, especially the relationship between Jubilee and Wolverine. But I didn't really care enough to collect them. So Flash forward many years later, and I'm with said brother, and we were hanging out at a cafe, and he wanted to read some old comics, and he gave me Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, and I read it basically in one sitting, and I was like, "This is where comic books are." And he said, "That's like 20 years old." I was like,
Yeah.
"What?" And so I went to my local shop in Union Square in New York, and I was just like, "What are people reading?" And that's how I found the gateway into creator-owned comics through Vertigo. So I was obsessed with all the Vertigo titles, and it wasn't until I read Brian K. Vaughan and Pia Guerra's Why the Last Man that I was like, I have to do this. And so in the fall of 2008, the stock market had crashed. I was living in the West Village of Manhattan. I was broke. And because of that, I couldn't really go out. So I decided to write what I thought was going to be the most amazing zombie comic, not knowing that that genre was pretty saturated at the time. And so what started out as like a daily exercise turned into a week, turned into a month, turned into basically like a 6-month obsession, and I just never stopped from there.
So do you have a lot of ideas that came out of that time period that you've gotten to continue to work on, or a lot of them that then maybe you've put in the back burner and said, I got to come back to this because this was my first days of writing here.
Sure. The first idea that zombie thing sort of evolved into a cannibal story, which I did eventually find an artist, and I said, work at your own pace. I'm not expecting any deadlines, and we'll pitch it eventually. And he spent, I'd say, almost 8 years working on it, independent from his other stuff, and he finished it maybe a year and a half ago. And it's like a 110-page graphic novel, which it has not seen the light of day, unfortunately. JP, I swear we're gonna make something happen. Um,
So
but
finding
yeah,
that
my
right home,
ideas. Sorry.
about finding the right home for it, the right
Yeah,
publisher
and
that's
and at the
gonna.
time, I realized it was sort of a hard sell, and that's something that I've come to realize is like I've had ideas that have stayed in the pitch graveyard, and it's just timing.
Yeah.
And it's also where I was in my career, like how much I had published, where my name was as far as recognition. So there's always ideas that I have, and um, through sort of randomness, I got to know Steve Niles pretty early on in my career, and he had given me some really good advice. And he said, just keep filling that drawer with ideas, because there will be a day that someone says, "What else you got?" And you have to be ready. You have to have at least 3 ideas. And so I kind of took that to heart, and I've always sort of
Yeah.
operated that way.
Well, that's good to have that, just that back catalog of, oh, this idea that I didn't get to explore
Mhm.
fully yet. What about this? You like this one?
I mean, that might be a good segue into Gatsby, because that's exactly what happened. I pitched it to everybody. Nobody was interested. Um, I was with a literary agent that really wasn't really working out. So we parted ways, and I decided to try to find another one. And so I used the Gatsby pitch, which honestly started out as a young adult prose novel. I wrote it as a novel, wasn't very good, I can freely admit, but I liked the bones of what I was working on. And I decided to adapt it. And that adaptation and that pitch landed me a new agent, but she also struggled to find a publisher. And so I sort of tucked it into the pitch graveyard. And then um, Axel Alonso, who's chief creative officer at AWA, whose reputation precedes him because I've known of him for a very long time.
Yeah.
He found me through Made in Korea. And so he called me one day, which is so memorable because the day he called me out of the blue, I was at my grandmother's funeral. And I saw it on my caller ID, and I was like, I just excused myself. I was like, I have to step outside.
Yeah.
And we had like a hour and a half conversation, and by the end of it, he said, "What else you got?" Because I love Made in Korea, and I said, "Well, I got this thing no one's into," and I pitched it to him, and he said, "Send it to me." And then, like essentially within a month, my team was signed.
Wow. That, just having those connections and the right people out there looking out for it.
Yeah, just
And
hustling.
yeah. I feel like it, out there putting those stories out there and then connecting with more and more people in the comics industry, definitely from talking to other creators, just seems to make things happen within the comics industry.
Yeah, I believe that there's no idea truly dies. You just have to be willing to rework it. And um, something I learned early on was I had to get used to editing. I hated doing things more than once.
Yeah.
And that's sort of what I loved about working at Apple as a technician was the whole point is you have to do it right the first time. You can't use a part to replace and then break that part and do it again because that's going to cause
Yeah.
a lot of problems. So for me, I had to get used to just editing my scripts and getting used to being like on the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth draft. And that actually taught me that I can look back at old ideas and think, you know what, that was working 5 years ago, but sensibilities have changed in the marketplace. I need to update this for the current interests. And
Hmm.
so I have a graphic novel I need to start working on pretty soon that started out as one idea and it's completely evolved in something completely different because I wasn't willing to give up on it, but I was also willing to change it to a large degree.
Yeah. Say with that and like things changing over time, do you ever feel like you've put a reference into a comic where it made sense at that time? It was something pop culture related that was, big going on, and then you
Yeah,
come back, you're like, what? No one is going to understand what I'm talking about here.
I I guess the lesson I learned was that you can't really put song lyrics into books, especially if they're copywritten. So there are so many pitches I've written where I've used lyrics as part of the narrative, and then I've just come to the harsh reality that you just can't do that. So Virtually Yours actually was a prime example where the two protagonists, so to speak, who
Mhm.
it's not really a love story, it's more about um, living and existing outside of that love bubble, outside of that honeymoon
Yeah.
phase. It's more about friendship, but these two characters sort of bond over a Otis Redding song, which I could not use the lyrics for. So it was a creative maneuver where I had to, in the lettering process, remove the lyrics but change the dialogue so people could understand what these two people were talking about.
Nice. And so with Gatsby, it also originally had another version at AWA, right? Before it became a graphic novel.
Yeah, they had talked about releasing it as single issues, and after a lot of deliberation, I just stated the case that because what this is based on, it needs to come out as one complete work of
Mhm.
fiction because it's a literary adaptation. And to be completely honest, I don't really know how many comic book readers care about literary adaptations. So for me, it would just make more sense to go directly into the book market and make it into bookshops that would actually be interested because, a bookseller is more interested in Gatsby than, say, Superman. So
That's
yeah,
true.
and my publisher backed me, and I think it was a good idea.
Yeah, and that makes AWA's first original graphic
Yes.
novel then, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, which is pretty cool to be able to say that you got the first one out there.
Yeah.
um, so the story itself is really cool, and even if you don't know Gatsby, I feel like people are going to connect with what's going on in the story. Why choose to make it a modern day adaptation of Gatsby rather than telling it as its own separate story?
Um, well, I was never assigned it in high school for whatever reason, and in 2017, there were a lot of important things that happened to me that year. Um, that's when I decided to start weaving in my own personal narratives into my fiction. As a Korean adoptee raised by white parents, for most of my adult life, I've honestly viewed myself as white, and that sort of I had a reckoning with that in 2017, and it allowed me, it sort of enabled me to look at everything I was working on. I realized I'd been writing these white male savior narratives, which I thought was my story, but ultimately isn't. And I was really writing for an audience or for an editor instead of myself. And in that year, I sort of figured out that write what you know wasn't really good advice for me because that assumes that what I know is interesting.
Hmm.
And I just assumed what I know is not interesting. So I unpacked that statement and have come to realize that it's more interesting to write what you've survived because it puts you in a more authentic headspace. And when you do that, you put yourself into your story, which automatically makes it your own. And I tested that with Virtually Yours. And
Mhm.
then that had such a great response that sort of leaned harder into it when I wrote Made in Korea. And then Gatsby was another prime example that I could just lean into that and write my, sort of my truths, Easter egged inside of these stories.
Okay. I There's one thing that I remember from reading Gatsby in high school. It was one of the ones that I did have to read. There's a lot of them, though. The classic literature that I started reading probably right after high school. I was just like, I want to read more of these that I
Hmm.
didn't get assigned. But it was always there was the green light at the end of the pier,
Hmm.
and I like how you brought that in there without making it just the green light at the end of the pier. Just well done, your artist, Felipe. I was looking at how to say the last name.
Yeah.
Cunha,
Yeah. Cunha.
Cunha, Cunha. Um, just fantastic job, still bringing in the green imagery, so anyone who's familiar with Gatsby would recognize that scene immediately, but making it its own thing.
I have to give credit to Felipe and Durble, the colorist, because to be completely honest, I did not write any of that into the script. It was one of these things that there were a couple things from the original text that sort of I could never figure out how to incorporate them into the reimagining. So I just dropped them, and I knew it was a risk because I knew some of the diehard fans of the book were probably gonna be upset. But the green light and the Dr. T.J. Eckelberg billboard that they pass going
Oh
into
yeah.
Manhattan was not there. So yeah, that's actually pretty clever. I actually did not notice that until just now.
The green light, and that I immediately, as soon as they're like looking across, I'm like, "Ah."
Yeah.
The eyes
Um,
of TJ Eckelberg.
yeah, Eckelberg.
I completely forgot about that until you just said that.
But there is a reference to it. There's a visual Easter egg in it.
I'm gonna have to do another
Yeah, when you see it,
read
you'll
through.
see it, and you go, "Oh, that's kind of." If anyone notices it, maybe not.
I think it's more just completely forgetting about that.
Mhm.
It's been a few years. Um, but I will appreciate that now, knowing and remembering that.
And so, what I'd say for people who haven't read the book, or even people who have, I wanted to make these characters more relatable, so I de-aged them. I made them younger as teenagers, and I couched all of it into sort of a police procedural. Um,
Mhm.
and I think that that is not a far stretch from the original text because there is ultimately a murder. Like Gatsby is shot,
Yeah.
and I always was curious about the police aspect of it, and I thought, how can I kind of explore that a bit more?
Yeah.
And that was really the catalyst for how I was going to adapt the prose novel, which was very different. It was, still teenage characters, but there was less diversity. I focused less on the original themes, and it was all set on a college campus. So I wanted to
Okay.
just change this to, a summer in Long Island, which is what the book is set around, is a summer, um,
Yeah.
and to modernize it, because for me, I wasn't quite sure if a 21st century Gatsby character could exist in the age of the internet. And once I figured out that it is possible, that's where the creative juices started to flow. And I was like, oh, this is going to be really fun because, the book is about a lot of things, but the things that stuck out to me when I read it was the American dream, the
Mhm.
reinvention of oneself, and specifically the reinvention. What I wanted to do with this book was Gatsby isn't the only one who's going to reinvent himself because everybody has access to social media. And in a way, you can reinvent yourself. Which all of that is to say, it stems from advice that my mom gave me when I was growing up because we moved a lot. And I'd say we moved every few years. And my mom would always say, when we started a new school, this is the time to reinvent yourself. You can be whoever you want to be. So reading Gatsby, that's the first thing I thought of was my mother's advice. And so it was a confluence of things that inspired me to write it.
I mean, I like you said, the influence from the book is all throughout here, but also if you've never read Gatsby, it's still it stands on its own. It's not like a lot of adaptations. I feel like you have to have some connection to the previous work to kind of pick up what's going on. But it's its own story and it's in its own right. I feel like,
Thank
despite
you.
being an adaptation.
Yeah, and I like to say that it's a reimagining because I think
Mhm.
that yes, I do focus on the major plot points of the book that make that story so beloved. I
Yeah,
needed to keep those intact, but because the characters are younger, which changes their relationships slightly, getting to those narrative checkpoints was the exercise for me. It was like, how do I get there? And
yeah,
to be completely frank, last summer when I was trying to wrap it up, uh, I couldn't figure out how to finish the last section of the book, which gets to Gatsby's demise. And I remember for like a couple months, I was like, I can't do this. I can't do this. I've written myself into a corner. So I feel like I figured it out, using the key players, having them play the parts they need to play to keep them true to the original text. But yeah, I for a while I didn't think I was going to be able to finish it. So I am very happy to see that it's done.
I'm happy to see that you found a way to end it and were able to get it out there to the world. There's a question from the audience if there's a preferred retailer that you end up getting the most, back from, or
Yeah, that doesn't really. I don't really factor that in. I just say support local, whether it's a local bookshop, your local comic book shop. I prefer that over, say, Amazon, to be completely honest.
yeah,
So that's my only 2 cents.
yeah. It's like unless you're stuck in the middle of somewhere where there's no shops nearby, and they are the only people that will deliver to you. But yeah, no, and the fact that it did get out there as the graphic novel to start means bookstores all around can order it for you. Um, I haven't been over to Barnes and Noble yet. I know they often have a big graphic novel section, my local one. I found some really cool things there that I'm like, hey, this is a small indie publisher and their books are in Barnes and
Yeah,
Noble,
it's
which is
awesome.
cool to see. But yeah, so I haven't gotten over there since then. But my shop actually literally just got it in the physical copy today.
Oh,
I had only gotten to read it before, thanks to AWA for their advanced copy.
nice.
They were supposed to get it last week, but Diamond's been sending them stuff like a week after the fact. A lot of the times recently,
Oh,
there's some stuff I was supposed to get this week that they're like, we have no idea where it is right now.
that's unfortunate.
So I actually had left the shop, went back to work, and my friend texted me and was like, "Hey, Gatsby came in." I was like, "Well, I got to pick it up before going live tonight." So I went back after work. Uh, but yeah, it's just, I mean, the supply of everything right now is
Yeah.
always in flux. Um, so with this story, what made you go with the art team that you went with for this, and how did you
Um,
guys start collaborating on this? Was that in like the early stages of you taking it from the novel form to the graphic novel,
mhm.
or did that come later on once you completed
So
adaptation?
Felipe and I have some history. We connected, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago. We did a 10-page short for an anthology that has yet to see the light of day, but uh, it was great working with him. And I just watched him over time get better and better. And as I
Mhm.
was developing this, and then I realized I was going to do it as a graphic novel, he was the first person I thought of because he can draw everything. And like, I need, a mansion to look like a mansion. I need a Range Rover to look like a Range Rover. Like, because it's grounded in such a specific reality, a specific part of the country, I needed someone who could do all of that. And my scripts tend to be very uh, sort of director driven. Like I provide a lot of reference images,
Okay.
and so he took all of those images and then just expanded upon them. It's not like, okay, I'm just going to draw this. He's like, I'm going to draw
Yeah.
this. I'm going to add that, and then this, and then, and like every single panel has
It's
such exquisite detail, which is necessary for the story.
yeah.
And Durable I had met years ago. I was in Dublin visiting my friends, Jordi Belair, who's a comic book colorist, and Declan Shalvey, very well-known comic
Yeah.
book artist. I was visiting them, and we all went out to dinner, and that's where I met Durable. And uh, we just
Okay.
kept in touch, and they were available when I was looking for a colorist, and so it all kind of worked out.
Say Derbo's colors I've seen on so many books. I feel like that their work is something that always stands out to me
Hmm.
when I'm looking at colors. So it's good to see that art team on here, because art teams always, it's like you're telling the story, but they really bring it to that next level and
Yeah,
bring it
bring it
to
to life
life.
for sure.
Um, oh, interesting question for, I guess, for anyone who's an aspiring writer out there. Is there anything that you use specifically for script writing, or do you just
I
get the Word document
use
open?
I don't use Word. I've jostled between, but I mostly use Apple's Pages, which is just their word processing app.
Yeah.
And for me, it took a while. My writing process has evolved over the 14 plus years, but I used to longhand my outlines in a spiraling notebook, and then transcribing all of that into a document on my computer was so tedious. It made me not want to write, so I ended up giving up writing everything down and just going right to the computer. But I was able to um, look at scripts from Jason Aaron and Joshua Dysart, who become friends of mine, which is really neat. But they were very gracious to let me see their scripts, and seeing their formats, I sort of make an amalgam of the two to basically help with editing, because I was my script formats before were so tedious to edit because there was no real locked in format, and
Okay.
I was just hand formatting everything page by page. And then I saw theirs and I figured that out. And so for me, the process is just outlining like a 1 to 3 page document for the broad strokes of the story. I break that into issue breakdowns, so 22-page breakdowns for each issue or chapter. And then from there, that's all my creative heavy lifting. When I actually start scripting, it's pretty quick.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I know there's a lot of different ways I've seen from creators, all the way from these very, very detailed scripts up to like the writer and artist teams that have known each other for like 10 plus years. It's just like, do something cool in this panel.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, Dynamite, definitely check it out. Even like you said, you didn't pay
Yeah, you don't
attention
need to
reading
read.
Gatsby.
Yeah, you
Doesn't
don't need to
matter.
reread it. Just if you like teen dramas, I have a huge soft spot for shows like, Beverly Hills 90210, The OC, Dawson's Creek, Gossip Girl. Um, if you like those types of teen shows, teen dramas, mixed in with some, a thriller type pacing of a narrative set within a police procedural, I think you might really like it.
Yeah, definitely. And I was gonna say that you have some awesome things outside of this going on right now, including Marvel. Let's see. Uh, I don't know exactly because I don't have Marvel Unlimited, but
Yeah.
it's a online
It's a
story. It's
vertical
Marvel
scroll, their
Voices.
vertical scroll comic line.
Yeah,
It's for their Voices comic line through Marvel, and so I was invited to do a
Genius.
6 episode series using Pay
Yeah,
um, through the Iron Fist uh, storylines.
which I probably at some point will need to get Marvel Unlimited because there's a lot of cool things that have been coming out on their like digital only side of things. I really want to read the Jeff the Shark story that
Oh yeah, same.
that's been on there. But yeah, um, I'm excited to see more of Pay because there's not a whole lot of story for Pay yet.
Yeah, I read everything. When you get asked to do these things, the nice thing is, my editors, if I need any back issues of anything, they can send all of it to me. So I did read 2 different runs of Iron Fist that she's in.
Hmm.
Um, and if I'm being completely honest, one of the storylines I wasn't crazy about because just about every cliche of a teenage girl was thrown into that script, and it was very hokey, and I just wanted
Yeah,
something more real. And having worked in the school system for almost a decade, I was around children all the time, all the way from kindergarten all the way to high school. So I've had that lived experience to write a bit more authentically from that
yeah,
perspective. And so being able to use her was pretty cool. And like it's this idea of this young person, their whole identity is wrapped up in this power that they no longer have. And how do you reinvent yourself? So in a way, it was kind of nice to roll into this about reinventing yourself after working on Gatsby, just reinventing yourself in a completely different way, in a more grounded way.
yeah,
And so it was hard because there was just a lot of continuity that I had to be mindful of, and that's been the biggest challenge. Is like, I want to write these things, and then my editor will hit me back like, "Oh, you can't do this because X, Y, Z." Oh, okay. So it's a lot of pivoting
yeah.
constantly.
Yeah, I mean that sounds like that's one of the big challenges going from indie work to the big two is you have to watch out for what's going on in this story over here and what's going on over here, and
Mhm.
the editor thankfully will catch you, I guess, if something like that happens. But do you feel like that limits the story you can tell in any way, or do you feel like you can still then spin it in a new way to tell us the story that you want to tell?
It's a great question. I think if I was to say it's limiting, I think that that's just the signs of a less seasoned writer because you should be able to write anything, and writing is simply problem solving. Like breaking story, whether
Yeah.
it's by yourself, whether it's in a room of other writers. I had the fortune of spending about a year working on a video game series, and being in a room of writers, breaking story was so exciting because it wasn't just me with my thoughts; it's throwing ideas around, and there's no bad story. It's a lot of the pitching the phrasing would be like, okay, bad pitch. And you just say something and then you riff with the other writers. And so for me, I just looked at it as, okay, this is a new problem I need to solve.
Okay.
Um, and it's a bit disappointing because the first thing I ever did for the Big Two was a short story for their Voices anthology from Marvel.
Hmm.
And I got to use a character, Silhouette, who was in this 90s mutant team called New Warriors, which a lot of problematic representation in that book. But I used the character Silhouette, who, what kind of blew my mind about this character is that she can teleport through shadows, which is cool.
Hmm.
But her clothes don't go with her. And I reread these issues and I was like, I don't understand how this was allowed. Like she literally shows up in a firefight with the Punisher and she's naked. I'm like, I hate this. I hate all of
How
this.
how how did they let that happen?
I honestly 90s comics, I guess, but so I
90s were
got
a
to
weird
kind of
time.
have better representation for her. But one of the scenes I wrote for this 8-page short was actually no, it was a 5-page short. Uh, it's in New York City. She lives in New York City. She doesn't have a civilian name, which I thought was very strange. How does a superhero compartmentalize their life if they don't have a civilian name? So I give her one, which is cool because that adds to her canon.
Yeah.
But my original draft of that story is that she bumps into Matt Murdock and they have this nice exchange. And the whole thing was a dating story, which is what I pitched to my editor. And that's how I wanted to end because I thought it'd be cute. And I was like, oh my God, this would be so great if I could actually use Daredevil. So cool. My editor's like, well, he's in jail right now, so you can't use it. I was like, oh, good to know.
Blame Chip Zdarsky. Putting Daredevil in jail. Oh man. Yeah, no, but that's cool though. You get to play with those characters and add to the canon of their story, to add to who they are, give them a name, because I didn't realize there were characters that have been out there that long that didn't have a name,
Yeah.
even being a part of the New Warriors.
Hmm.
So that's really cool. And now you get to add to Pay's story in
Yeah, I
kind of
added to
this
Pay's
realm.
story. I added to Mantis' story for Guardians of the Galaxy. I did another 10-page short for the Voices anthology this year or last year. And my editor specifically had an objective, which was the problem is Mantis in the storyline is green. And he's like, Asian woman who has green skin is literally an alien. It's problematic. We need to make her human skin tone to sort of match the cinematic universe. And I was like, cool. How do I do that? And he's like, I have no idea. Have fun. So I
Solve
read,
our problem.
I mean, I'm pretty sure I read close to 1,000 pages of back issues. And she goes all the way back to the 70s. She was an
Yeah.
original Avenger. She was on a stamp. I mean, like, there's so much about her character. Also, a lot of problematic representation with her character in the 70s. So to kind of rewrite that and figure out why she goes from green to human skin tone was a fun challenge.
Yeah. I have a question here about, do you prefer working on graphic novels or comic issues? Or I'm going to add something to this. Do you, if you're writing like a mini series, like the several issues of Pay here, are you writing out the entire story and then breaking it out into those single issues?
Yes. I mean, I've never looked at graphic novels in a limited series or a mini series differently. I everything is 20 or 22 pages, and I will either in my mind think of it as an issue or a chapter.
Mhm.
but I structure it all the same. So it doesn't matter if you get it monthly or you get it all in one go. It should still read perfectly fine. And I don't think it's bad to have, uh, let's say if we're doing a graphic novel, it's not bad to have cliffhangers every, 20 so odd pages.
Yeah.
So,
Which, like, that adds to the, if you want to take a break in the middle of I mean, graphic novels are pretty long. Some people can't sit and read through the whole thing all at once. So
and also that's for me to just kind of mitigate the stress of it because if I, look at working on a graphic novel and it's like, oh, I've got to write 200 plus pages, my brain's just like, no,
yep,
you're not.
nope, nope,
So
I'm done. Done
yeah,
for today.
not
Never
doing
touching
it,
this
but
again.
do it one chapter at a time. It's a lot easier.
Okay. Uh does yeah. With I had a question there and it just left my brain. It was something along those lines. If it comes back to me, we'll come back to it.
Sounds good.
Um, but the other cool thing that you've got coming up is with DC and working with Spirit World,
Hmm.
which just had the first issue release, and you're writing a short for that in an upcoming anthology, right?
Yeah,
Is
that'll
it
be out
their
May 30th.
the DC Pride anthology?
Yep.
Yeah.
So that was
Um,
cool. And like again, I got approached by an editor there. Um, and I'd heard about Spirit World. I was very excited about it. And it was fun to sort of briefly chat with Alyssa about what they'd created and seeing some of the early pages. I was like, oh my God, this book's
yeah.
amazing. And, again, my editor's like, we need to team this character with someone else. Who do you want that to be? And I was like, doesn't matter to me who's available. And my editor's like, that woman. I was like, done. Kate Kane,
Yes.
yes. And so to get to write Kate Kane is really cool because I love that character. So yeah, it was pretty neat to be able to do that.
Yeah. I'm not a big DC reader. People that watch this probably know that. I currently have on my pull list Dark Knights of Steel, the fantasy version that Tom Taylor's been writing. And I just added Harley Quinn when Sweeney Boo and Teenie Howard took over the run.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
It's
And I
totally
picked
fair.
up.
I totally get it because like something I've learned, and the video game I was working on was for DC, and so it was really interesting to get to not just play in the sandbox, but learn
Yeah.
about those characters very in depthly. And what I sort of walked away from that experience was the problem I see with DC is that they just have a lack of really good villains. Most of them are in Batman. And
Yeah.
if you look at all, like, I
Which is
had to
why we
look at
started
like
Batman.
100 villains, and they're all just terrible. Like, my favorite character in the DCU is Flash. I would love to write a Flash story, but the villains, the names are just eye rolling, cringy bad.
Yeah.
And it's like, I get it. Like, that's unfortunate. But once you get to know, like, me getting to understand the characters of like Aquaman and Flash and Poison Ivy and uh, just these characters are actually really interesting. Even Superman, who I've had no interest in, working on that character with a team of writers and breaking that character down and examining him in ways that I'd never looked at him before was really, really kind of cool. And honestly, right now, I'm actually more interested to play within DC Sandbox than Marvel's.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, the reason I was saying that was I picked up the free comic book day edition that had Spirit World and it had the Vigil and City Boy.
Hmm.
And I was like, this is awesome. These are all new characters in DC that I'm actually kind of excited about and want to check out. And so I picked up Spirit World last week when it released. I think I did not realize Vigil released this week, but apparently it did. I know, yeah, there was a new Titans book that released also today, which I think Tom Taylor is writing that one as well. But yeah, I was just like, okay, this is. I mean, my pull list is already long enough, but I'm excited to check these out. So then I saw that you were writing that short coming up in the Pride anthology. which usually like the Marvel and DC anthology books, I'm like, okay, let me check this out and see if there's any characters popping into here that catch my interest and want me,
Mhm.
I want to read more of their story.
Sure.
So I'm excited to see that. And again, it's really cool to see the indie, usually indie writers, getting those opportunities to play in the Marvel and DC sandboxes.
Yeah, I think for anybody who's maybe not familiar with my work, I would recommend checking out the Voices Spider-Verse anthology that came out
Mhm.
last month, I think.
That was
Um,
a good one.
I got to work with Cindy Moon Silk, and it's a character that I will give full credit to my best friend Susan, who got me into that character, reading that character. Um, I went with a bold approach, and I like that, and I hope more people look at that body of work as an indie creator doing something indie with a mainstream character, because I tell her entire
Mhm.
story through a first person POV, which my editor was like, "No, we need to see her." I said, "We will in Reflections and Mirrors." And he's like, "No."
It
And I
was so
said,
much fun. I loved it.
"Thank you." And he was like, I don't really think this is gonna work. And I said, if we don't do this, I don't think I'm interested in doing it. And he said, okay. And as soon as he saw the first layouts for it from Eric,
Yeah.
he was like, this is amazing. I was like, see, you just
Yeah.
got to be a little punk rock about it and just try something you
Right.
never know.
Yeah. Silk is so yeah, we got
Nice.
some Silk there from Sweeney Boo.
Oh,
Uh
awesome.
and then Silk's first appearance over here.
What?
Silk's one of my favorites in the
Oh, respect.
Spider-Verse. And then Silk and Spider-Gwen. Whoop. I can't keep that there. There we go. But yeah, no, I'm in New Orleans, and Sweeney was here for Fan Expo in January, and so
Awesome.
I was like,
She's a
I
friend.
gotta have you do a Silk head sketch. So that was cool.
Nice.
Um, but yeah, no, so it was cool to see that story, and the current Silk series is pretty different so far too. It
Have not checked it out.
definitely look like, at least the first issue, it was not at all like what I would have expecting from a Marvel story with the typical like, oh, here's our villain, we're setting him up in the first issue of this mini series. Um, Completely different take on it.
Was it
But
good different or just different
I
different?
think so. But I also question if they're about to create like a Silk verse like they've done with Gwen,
Oh.
Spider Gwen.
Mhm.
We've got the Spider Verse, and then we've got all the. Oh, I keep hitting my microphone. We've got all of these different Spider Gwen characters now that they've been creating. There was like the good ones. Now they've got this mini series of all the the villain ones. So then almost feels like we're about to get this with Silk too, and I'm like, let's not stretch it. Let's not stretch it. But it was an interesting take on just a storytelling.
Okay, I'll have to check it out.
But yeah, no, still cool. I'm gonna read all the Silk books, even if I'm like, what is going on here? Why are we doing
That's a
this?
true fan. That's a
Yeah.
true fan.
Spider-Man, I like Spider-Man, so I tend to stay in the Spider-Verse area of things, but I can't read all of the Spider-Man stories. There's too many.
Sure. I mean, to be honest, that's why I didn't read them as a kid, because the continuity just was a huge
Yeah.
deterrent for me. So it's sort of ironic that I'm having to deal with it now professionally.
Now it's your job to go
Yeah,
back
now
and
it's my
read all
job to
the
care.
stories and learn them. I think that's why I tend to stick to the indie side of things for the most part,
Sure.
because you don't have to spend years catching up on continuity to know what's going on, or if they reference an event that
Mhm.
happened before. It's a brand new story. It's all contained in maybe one volume, maybe two or three volumes, but or I guess if you're Brian K. Vaughan, we're at 10,
Yeah.
11 volumes of Saga, uh, or however many Invincible volumes we had, or Walking Dead. But a lot of your stories tend to stay on the mini, or I think you had the maxi series a little bit with which is funny. So I'm reading this in Virtually Yours, but
Mm.
was that actually factual about how long? Which one was it? It was Southern Dog. You're good
Oh,
for
yeah,
12?
it's so funny. I wrote that in because I the characters like one of the main characters, Max, spends all his time at a comic book shop, and I resurrected a shop that doesn't exist anymore, but it was my second home. This place, Bergen Street Comics in Prospect Heights, Brooklyn, and that
Okay.
was such a community builder, and it's where I met so many people, uh, local creators, big name people. Like I got to spend like 45 minutes just chatting with Jeff Johns one night. So like it was such a great place and I wanted to bring it back. And I was like, well, there's got to be a comic book signing because that's what the owners Tom and Amy used to do. They used to
Yeah.
host local creators. And I thought I never got to do a signing there. So you know what? Screw it. I'm gonna write myself into my own. And so people have asked me, they're like, is Southern Dog, does it have a Netflix deal? I'm like, that would be the coolest way to announce that, but no. That's
So
fiction.
it's funny is I did Google that just to like confirm that it's not, 'cause I was like, I feel like I would have seen this.
Yeah.
But was the 12 issue piece?
No, no, it was only actually 4 issues.
That's
But
funny. Okay.
it's not to say that I don't wanna do longer format stuff. Like, I've gotten to do 2 books. I did a graphic novel, after Houdini with
Mhm.
a small press publisher, Insight Comics, and they loved that so much, they wanted me to do a sequel, and I was like, "I don't wanna do a sequel, I never had any intentions," but they're like, "We really want this." I said, "Okay." So then I kinda wrote a prequel. So, that's the longest form I've ever done. Gatsby might be close to that based on page count, but, yeah, I mean, I would love to do an ongoing series, that's the dream, just haven't had the opportunity.
Is that one of those ideas you got floating around pre pre-written up, or you still feel like those are better off for, shorter stories at the moment?
I like contained stories. It's sort of why I like limited series and television. Like
Mm,
Damon Lindelof's Watchmen for HBO was amazing,
yeah.
and I like more stuff like that where it's you know I like anybody that sets out with a very clear vision of what they want to do, and they're not going to compromise that vision, and they're not going to change it. I mean, um, I was hanging out with Donnie Cates years ago, and he was telling me this story about how he had just gone to dinner with Robert Kirkman and Eric Stevenson, and I was like, "Okay." And he's like, "They want more God Country," and I said, "No." I was like, "What?" He's like, "I set out to do it as long as I did it, and there's no more, no less." And I was like, "That's the way to do it." And I just love
Yeah.
anyone that operates with that mindset.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I would love to do more. I mean, I did a graphic novel for the same publisher, Insight, called Skip to the End, which is, a music is time travel type of story. And I sort of see that story being 3 books, but whether or not I get to do them, yet to be seen. But I don't really have anything I could see being extended. Even Made in Korea, I could only really see one more book out of that, which not sure if I'm ever going to get to it.
It's fair. So if you do have something that's more ongoing, you'll have already had kind of maybe an idea of start, middle, end laid
Mhm.
out before you set out to do it. And then once you hit your point, no matter what they tell you, you're like, I'm done. We are not making this go longer. Unless
Yeah,
you come up with, I guess, as the story's progressing, you realize, wait, there's more to be told in this world.
yeah. I mean, honestly, I'd love to see some of that. If I was to explore any of these books of mine, I'd love to probably explore them in a different medium, so like film or TV.
Awesome. So with your, I guess, background starting out with directing, would you want to be involved at that level, or would you want to let somebody else take the reins and, you know, run with it from there?
It's a great question. I would eventually want to be involved as a writer, but I think that would be the extent of it.
Okay.
And I
Like
know, I
consulting
think,
on it and
yeah, consulting would be cool. Even just being in the writer's room would be cool eventually for any of these adaptations. I think that it depends on who you ask regarding adaptations. I know, some people don't want their image to be changed, their vision for their project to be changed, and they need to
yeah.
be very hands-on. I don't see it that way. Like, if there's a big name writer or director who wants to take it, it's like I did my thing with my book, you run with it because
Yeah.
it's not my world. And I know that these things, when they change, they need to change to fit that format and that delivery system. So totally open to it. But eventually, I would love to write one of those.
Are there any books in particular that you've done that you would really want to see adapted first, or you're just open to anything happening?
I'd love to see Made in Korea, but there is subject matter in that I understand can be very difficult. Would be very difficult. Would be a hurdle. There's an active shooter component in the book, which just with certain
Yeah,
sensibilities, I know that's a really hard sell. And I've looked into the history, recent history in the last decade or so, about that subject matter being woven into stories, and there's not a lot of them. Um, so that would be one. And honestly, I'd love to see Gatsby because I just spent so much time in this world, and I'd love for people to have another reference other than Baz Luhrmann's. And then there's the Robert Redford one from eons ago, which
yeah,
I've never seen. But to be able to add my own touch to that would be pretty cool.
yeah. And I mean, I feel like their next step, next time they were to make they're probably gonna make Gatsby again at
Yeah.
some point down the line, because it seems like a lot of those classics get retold over and over again in movies.
Well, Clover Press just did it,
And yeah, yeah,
and it's like I love what they did with that, and it's cool, and uh, yeah, it's great. But
yeah, they went for the direct adaptation route versus the
which
new
is
twist
cool, but
on
it's
it.
like I
I read
wouldn't
that
find
story,
any
but
interest in working on something like that because it's like why not remix it? Why not make it
yeah,
contemporary? Because those things, I think some people find that oversaturated, that market of like contemporizing classics. But I think if you can do it in a way where, like you say, if it can stand on its own, but
mhm,
it can also, you see where the inspiration came from. I think
right.
that's really what my goal is.
I like that. Yeah. Um, I did not read the Clover Press adaptation because, like you said, it was more direct adaptation, and I wasn't feeling it at the time. But it was funny, the timing of, I think now
Hmm.
their graphic novel version of it. It was releasing single issues, but now the graphic novel was coming out around the same time as yours was hitting shelf. I think did I see you post like somebody put an article out there
Yeah,
about,
Forbes did it, which
yeah,
I didn't know about that article, and my publisher sent him. I was like, oh, that's kind of
huh,
it's kind of
Forbes.
interesting.
Okay.
I mean, I
That's
typically, when
awesome.
I'm working on my stories, when it comes to titles, I will do a Google search. And with Made in Korea, it was really funny because I didn't do that. And I did it once I got the release date for the graphic novel or the collected trade paperback. And there was a novel coming out, a young adult novel that came out the exact same week called Made in Korea. I was like,
Oh,
what? And then I reached out to the author, this woman's Sarah Suk, and we become friends. And I love her story, which is completely different. It's a young adult romance dealing with K beauty products at a high school. And I was like, was it always meant to release this week? She's like, no, it got delayed. I was like, that's so weird. Mine got delayed too, and it's literally coming out within a day of each other. It's just wild.
wow. So I had come across that when I was trying to find the image for Made in Korea to put into the thumbnail. And I was like, I don't think I remember seeing this before, but it must have been because the timing of everything back then. Wow. That's it's funny how the world works.
I know, right? It's
Just like, yeah, nobody's written a book like this before. And then,
that's the
oh,
zeitgeist, right? It's like so. My friend Justin Jordan and I talk a lot about like ideas and creativity, and he is an idea machine. Like him and James Tynion are two guys that I've known for a long time, and just the output of creative ideas blows my mind. And so I was talking to Justin years ago about this because he used to have a blog, and he would literally just post his ideas. And I was like, dude, you're giving your ideas away. And he said, here's the thing. He explained it that he's like, when I post online, I'm making a paper trail, a receipt, if you will. I was like, oh,
hmm,
that's clever. He said, but if I don't ever get around to it, or if someone beats me to that idea and they do it better, they deserve it. And I was like, yeah, like he's not
I
precious
like
with these
that.
things, and I
Yeah.
think that's just a testament to his creativity.
I mean, it sounds like he wants that idea to be told, whether it ends up coming from him or someone else who, like you said, if he does it better, great. The story's out there. It needed to be told.
And what's even smarter is that he uses it as sort of market research because he'll throw out 5 ideas and he says, "Which do you wanna would you read first?" And then it basically helps him decide which project to work on first.
That's smart.
So smart. I'm like, "Dude,
And
Justin, you're a genius."
everyone else is sitting there like, these ideas are mine. You can't know about it until it's, into that next
Exactly.
stage. Meanwhile, he's out there beating everybody to the punch and just telling the stories.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tynan and I have to say the only person I feel like puts out more ideas and stories than Tynan is Colin Bunn.
Cullen, I think
Like,
also a machine is like Charles Soule is also one of
yeah,
those people that I've known for a long time as well, and, I was getting to know Charles before he had made a name for himself, and, uh, yeah, that guy is,
just
all
beast.
these people are just, inspirations for me, for sure.
Yeah. Is that your eventual goal is to kind of be just pumping ideas out and just
I
getting
think
them
that,
out there all
like,
the time?
I would like to get more into the book market space. I kinda wanna get away from single issues because, like,
Yeah.
marketing that stuff every month is sort of exhausting, and there's a drop off that happens that everybody's aware
Yeah.
of. I'd rather put all of my energy into a book that comes out and you can get it, because honestly, I hate trying to sell single issues at a convention. Um, so fortunately have a literary agent, and I want to be pitching more graphic novels. My agent really wants me to do middle grade, which has never been my bag, but like it's such a big market. I'm like, okay, so I
There's
have a
yeah.
pitch I'm developing with her. But realistically, I think I could write a 200 to 250 page book every 3 months. Like that's really how I can see myself working.
Okay.
And that's sort of the kind of timeline I'm trying to develop now. It's like, I'm promising these publishers, give me 3 months to get you a manuscript, and then rinse and repeat with each book. And I think that's
Yeah.
something I can do rather than trying to write 3 stories simultaneously for single issues.
That seems hard to have multiple story ideas going on at the same time. You start mixing and matching and
Yeah.
um I there's some authors I see out there that have like novel authors, not comics,
Mhm.
but will have like timelines of where they are with like projects, and they have 4 or 5 projects going at the same time. It's like this one's being written, first draft. This one's being edited. This one's I'm reworking, and it's like how do you keep your story straight and not mix them up?
Yeah.
So that's just yeah. There's a lot of different, I guess, approaches to all of that. But it's more made in Korea love.
Oh, thanks so much.
Well, if you loved Made in Korea, don't miss Gatsby from AWA, just released last week and can be found in comic shops, in bookshops, online, anywhere but Amazon. Don't go to Amazon. Oh. Or
It's
do if you can't find it
Yes,
anywhere
if
else.
you must. So it's available in comic book shops now.
Yeah,
It'll be available in all bookstores May
that's right.
30th. So, like, if
End
you
of
have a
March.
local bookshop, they will be
Yeah,
able to order it starting May 30th.
awesome. Yeah, looking forward to Gatsby. Great, Phil. Awesome. Where can people follow along with what you've got going on?
Sure. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, Jeremy Holt Books, and my website's also Jeremy Holt Books. So pretty easy to remember.
That's makes it nice and easy. Talked with so many people that it's like over here it's this, over
Yeah.
here it's this, and then that recently I had some guys on. It was like these 2 places straight and easy. It's my name, and then over here it's something else. And they even laughed about it. They're like, I don't know why. I just did this. Thank you, Dynamite, for tuning in, and hope you get to check out Gatsby. Um, Thank you, Jeremy, for coming on. I didn't acknowledge this earlier, but it's a Jeremy and Jeremy talk today. But yeah, thanks again for coming on and
Yeah. Thanks for
chatting.
having me.
Absolutely. Thanks everyone who's been watching tonight and catches this later on the replay. Have a nice night.